They all describe the same impossible sensations, the electric feeling that crawls across your skin, the silence so complete it feels like the world has been turned off, the moment when gravity itself seems to forget how to work. Tonight, I'm bringing you 14 documented cases from people who experienced something that defies explanation, cases that certain agencies would prefer remained classified. Military personnel who lost entire nights during routine missions, scientists whose instruments recorded readings that mysteriously disappeared from official reports, ordinary families whose encounters were quietly investigated and then forgotten. Welcome to Arcade Recaps. I'm your host, and these accounts span 5 decades and multiple continents, yet they reveal patterns so consistent they can't be coincidence, so dangerous to the official narrative that government agencies have worked overtime to keep them buried. Before we dive into these encounters, drop a comment and let me know where you're listening from tonight. Now settle in somewhere comfortable, turn down the lights, and prepare for testimonies that will make you look at the night sky differently. The first story takes us to a small farming community in the Midwest, where a family's peaceful rural life was shattered by events that defied every natural law they thought they understood. It was a crisp October evening when Sarah Mitchell first noticed the lights above her family's cornfield. She was washing dishes after dinner, glancing out the kitchen window toward the fields that had been in her husband's family for 3 generations. The lights weren't like anything she'd seen before. They moved with purpose, hovering and shifting in patterns that seemed almost deliberate. Sarah called to her husband Tom, who was helping their 2 children with homework in the living room. When he joined her at the window, the lights had arranged themselves in a perfect triangle, each point pulsing with a soft blue radiance that cast an otherworldly glow across the cornstalks below. That's when they heard it, a low humming sound that seemed to vibrate through the walls of their farmhouse, making the windows rattle gently in their frames. It wasn't mechanical like a helicopter or airplane. It was something else entirely, something that made their teeth ache and their skin tingle with static electricity. Tom grabbed his shotgun from the closet, not because he thought he could fight off whatever was out there, but because holding it made him feel less helpless. Sarah gathered their children, 8-year-old Emma and 6-year-old Jake, keeping them close as the family watched the impossible scene unfolding in their backyard. The lights began to descend, moving closer to the ground with that same deliberate precision. As they dropped lower, the humming intensified, and Sarah noticed something that made her blood run cold. The corn beneath the lights was bending away from them, not as if blown by wind, but as if the plants themselves were recoiling from whatever force the objects projected. Then the lights went out. Complete darkness fell across the field, but the humming continued, now joined by a sound Sarah would never forget. It was like voices, but not quite human voices. They spoke in harmonious tones that seemed to bypass her ears and resonate directly in her mind. Tom later described it as the moment he realized they weren't alone on their property. Something was walking through their cornfield, moving toward the house with footsteps that were too light and too evenly spaced to be human. The family huddled together in their kitchen, watching the back door and praying that whatever was out there would simply leave them alone. But it didn't leave them alone. Over the following weeks, the Mitchell family experienced a series of events that transformed their quiet farm into something resembling a research facility. They would wake to find strange markings burned into their fields, perfectly geometric patterns that appeared overnight with no explanation. Their livestock began behaving erratically, gathering in tight groups and refusing to graze in certain areas of their pasture. The most disturbing part wasn't the lights or the sounds or even the mysterious crop circles. It was the way their memories seemed to have gaps. Sarah would find herself standing in the middle of a field with no recollection of how she got there. Tom would wake up fully dressed on the living room couch, his boots muddy and his clothes damp with dew, with no memory of going outside. Their children began drawing pictures that made their parents' skin crawl. Emma, who had always drawn typical childhood scenes of houses and flowers, suddenly began creating detailed sketches of tall, thin figures with large eyes and elongated limbs. When asked where she'd seen such beings, she would simply say They visited her room at night to show her things. The Mitchell family's ordeal continued for months, but what happened next reveals the true nature of how these encounters are managed by those in power. 3 days after Tom finally decided to contact local authorities about the strange activity on their property, 2 men in dark suits arrived at their farm. They claimed to be federal investigators looking into reports of unusual atmospheric phenomena in the area. They were polite but insistent, asking detailed questions about everything the family had witnessed. They took photographs of the crop circles, collected soil samples, and interviewed each family member separately. Within a week of that visit, Tom received a job offer from an agricultural company based in another state. The salary was double what he'd been making from farming, and the company even offered to purchase their land at well above market value. When Tom hesitated, citing the generations of family history tied to the farm, the company representative mentioned specific details about their recent experiences that no outside party should have known. The Mitchell family relocated within a month. Their new neighbors in suburban Colorado knew nothing of their background or their reasons for leaving their generational farm. Sarah found work at a local school, and the children adapted to their new environment with surprising ease. The strange dreams and drawings stopped almost immediately after the move, but the story doesn't end there. 2 years later, Sarah received a phone call from a woman claiming to be a journalist, researching unexplained phenomena in rural communities. The woman had somehow obtained detailed information about their experiences at the farm, including specific dates and descriptions that match Sarah's memories perfectly. During their conversation, the journalist revealed something that sent chills down Sarah's spine. The Mitchell farm wasn't an isolated case. The same pattern had played out dozens of times across the Midwest over the past 2 decades. Families experiencing ongoing UFO activity, followed by visits from government representatives, followed by lucrative relocation offers that were difficult to refuse. The journalist had been tracking these cases for years, documenting a systematic program of contact management that extended far beyond simple witness intimidation. These families weren't being silenced through threats or violence. They were being quietly relocated, their stories buried under layers of bureaucracy and financial incentives that made resistance nearly impossible. What makes the Mitchell case particularly significant is what happened to their former property after they left. The agricultural company that purchased their land never developed it for farming. Instead, it became part of a larger tract of restricted government land, inaccessible to the public, and monitored by security systems that seemed far more sophisticated than anything needed to protect empty fields. Local residents reported seeing unusual lights in the area for years after the Mitchell family's departure, but these sightings were never investigated by local authorities. When pressed, officials would cite ongoing agricultural research or atmospheric testing as explanations for any unusual activity. The Mitchell family's story represents just one thread in a tapestry of managed contact that stretches across decades and involves countless families whose experiences have been carefully documented, catalogued, and buried by agencies with unlimited resources and no accountability to the public. Their case reveals something crucial about how these encounters are handled at the highest levels. This isn't about covering up random UFO sightings or discrediting individual witnesses. This is about managing an ongoing program of contact between human civilians and non-human intelligence, a program that appears to have been operating with the full knowledge and cooperation of government agencies for generations. The second story takes us from rural farmland to the cockpit of a commercial airliner, where a veteran pilot's routine flight became an encounter that would challenge everything he thought he knew about controlled airspace and the objects that move through it. Captain Robert Hayes had been flying commercial aircraft for over 20 years when he encountered something that shouldn't exist according to every manual, regulation, and physical law governing aviation. It was a clear Tuesday morning in March, and he was piloting a Boeing 737 from Denver to Chicago with 147 passengers on board. The flight had been routine until they reached cruising altitude over Nebraska. That's when Hayes noticed the objects on his radar. 3 distinct contacts moving at speeds that defied explanation. Air traffic control confirmed they had no scheduled aircraft in that sector, and military radar showed the same mysterious contacts. What happened next was captured on the cockpit voice recorder, providing audio evidence that would later disappear from official records. Hayes can be heard describing objects that appeared to be pacing his aircraft, maintaining perfect formation despite flying at speeds that should have been impossible for any known technology. The objects weren't just fast, they were performing maneuvers that violated basic principles of physics, making sharp angular turns without losing speed, stopping instantly from high velocity and accelerating beyond anything in the current aerospace inventory. But here's where the story becomes truly disturbing. Within hours of landing, Hayes was contacted by federal aviation authorities who informed him that his flight data had been classified for national security reasons. The cockpit voice recordings were confiscated, and all crew members were required to sign non-disclosure agreements that carried severe criminal penalties for violation. The passengers who had witnessed the objects through their windows found their photos and videos mysteriously corrupted or deleted from their devices. Several reported receiving visits from federal agents who conducted interviews about their observations and strongly advised them against discussing the incident publicly. Captain Hayes himself faced immediate career consequences. Despite his spotless 20-year record, he was grounded pending a psychological evaluation. When he passed that evaluation with flying colours, he was transferred to domestic routes with much lower visibility and significantly reduced responsibilities. The official explanation for the radar contacts was atmospheric anomalies caused by weather conditions. However, meteorological data from that day showed clear skies with no atmospheric disturbances that could account for the observed phenomena. What makes Hayes' case particularly compelling is that it wasn't an isolated incident. Records obtained through Freedom of Information Act requests reveal dozens of similar encounters involving commercial aircraft over the past decade, each one resulting in the same pattern of evidence confiscation, witness management, and career consequences for crew members who reported what they saw. These aren't random encounters with curious extraterrestrial visitors. They represent something far more systematic and coordinated, something that suggests ongoing monitoring and interaction between non-human intelligence and our transportation systems. The pattern is always the same. Highly credible witnesses with impeccable records encounter objects that demonstrate technology far beyond our current capabilities. Physical evidence is quickly confiscated or explained away. Witnesses face career consequences or relocation. The incidents are classified and buried in files that remain sealed for decades. This systematic approach to encounter management reveals the true scope of what we're dealing with. We're not looking at random UFO sightings that governments are trying to debunk or dismiss. We're looking at evidence of an ongoing program of contact and monitoring that extends into the highest levels of military and civilian aviation authority. The third case brings us to the Nevada desert, where a geological survey team stumbled upon something that would challenge their understanding of both Earth's history and humanity's place in the cosmic order. Dr. Elena Rodriguez had been conducting mineral surveys in remote desert regions for over 15 years. She was methodical, thorough, and completely unprepared for what her team would uncover during a routine expedition in the summer of 2018. They were mapping underground water sources when their ground-penetrating radar detected an anomaly buried approximately 30 feet beneath the desert floor. The readings showed a massive metallic structure, geometrically perfect and completely inconsistent with any known geological formation. What started as scientific curiosity quickly evolved into something far more disturbing. As Dr. Rodriguez's team began careful excavation, they realized they weren't looking at some ancient artifact or buried military equipment. The metal was unlike anything in the periodic table, and the structure itself seemed to pulse with a faint energy that registered on their electromagnetic detection equipment. The team worked for 3 days, carefully documenting everything they found. The The structure appeared to be part of a much larger complex, extending deep underground, with corridors and chambers that suggested intelligent design. The metal surfaces were covered in symbols that resembled no known written language, yet somehow conveyed meaning that the team members found themselves understanding without explanation. Dr. Rodriguez later described the experience as having information downloaded directly into her consciousness. She knew, without knowing how she knew, that this structure was incredibly ancient, predating human civilization by thousands of years. More disturbing still, she understood that it wasn't abandoned. Something was still down there, waiting. On the fourth day of excavation, that something made contact. The team was working at the edge of what appeared to be an entrance when their equipment began malfunctioning. Electromagnetic readings spiked beyond their instruments' capabilities, and several team members reported hearing sounds that seemed to come from inside their own heads rather than through their ears. Then the ground began to vibrate with a rhythm that felt almost like breathing. The excavation site filled with a soft luminescence that had no apparent source, and the team found themselves unable to move, frozen in place as shapes began emerging from the depths they had uncovered. Dr. Rodriguez described the beings as tall and ethereal, moving with a fluid grace that seemed to defy gravity. They communicated without words, projecting thoughts and images directly into the minds of the human observers. The message was clear. This site was not meant to be disturbed, and the team's presence had awakened something that had been dormant for millennia. What happened next reveals the speed and efficiency with which these encounters are managed by those who monitor such activities. Within hours of the contact event, military helicopters arrived at the remote site. The team was evacuated immediately, their equipment confiscated, and their research data classified under national security provisions. Dr. Rodriguez and her colleagues were debriefed for days by officials who seemed to know far more about what they had discovered than the discoverers themselves. They were informed that their find was related to ongoing geological research that required the highest levels of secrecy. Each team member was required to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements that effectively ended any possibility of discussing their experience publicly. The excavation site was sealed with concrete and designated as a restricted military testing area. All geological surveys in the surrounding region were suspended indefinitely, and the area was placed under permanent surveillance by agencies that refused to identify themselves to local authorities. But the most disturbing aspect of Dr. Rodriguez's case wasn't what happened at the site. It was what happened to her afterward. Within weeks of returning to her university position, she began experiencing memory lapses and periods of disorientation. Medical examinations revealed no physical cause for these symptoms, but colleagues noticed dramatic changes in her personality and behavior. She became obsessed with ancient history and archaeology, abandoning her geological research to pursue studies that seemed completely unrelated to her previous interests. Her family reported that she would spend hours staring at star charts and drawing symbols that resembled those found at the excavation site. Most troubling of all, Dr. Rodriguez began receiving visitors at her home. Neighbors described seeing tall figures in the early morning hours, moving through her backyard with that same fluid grace she had described from her desert encounter. These visits always coincided with her periods of memory loss and disorientation. The pattern suggests something far more complex than simple witness management. Dr. Rodriguez wasn't just being silenced about her discovery. She was being monitored, possibly even controlled, by the same intelligence that had been sleeping beneath the Nevada desert for thousands of years. Her case reveals a disturbing possibility that these encounters aren't random events, but part of an ongoing program of human monitoring and interaction that may have been operating since before recorded history. The beings her team awakened weren't visitors from another world. They were residents of this one, predating human civilization and maintaining some form of active presence in human affairs. The fourth story takes us into the realm of military radar operations, where a young technician's routine night shift became a window into aerial phenomena that officially don't exist. Sergeant Marcus Thompson was 24 years old and had been operating military radar systems for 3 years when he detected something that would forever change his understanding of what moves through our skies. It was a quiet Thursday evening at a classified installation in the Pacific Northwest, and Thompson was monitoring routine air traffic when his equipment began registering contacts that defied every protocol he'd been trained to follow. The objects appeared on his screen as solid returns, but they were moving at speeds that exceeded anything in the known military inventory. More disturbing still, they seemed to be responding to his radar sweeps, altering their flight patterns in ways that suggested awareness of being observed. Thompson followed protocol and immediately contacted his supervising officer, Staff Sergeant Williams, who confirmed the contacts on his own equipment. Together, they watched as multiple objects performed maneuvers that seemed to mock the laws of physics, making right-angle turns at incredible speeds and hovering motionless before accelerating beyond the range of their tracking systems. The objects weren't just fast and maneuverable. They were operating in restricted military airspace without any form of identification or communication with ground control. By every regulation governing that airspace, they should have been intercepted immediately by fighter aircraft stationed at the base, but no interceptors were scrambled. Instead, Thompson received a direct order from Base Command to discontinue radar tracking and file no reports about the contacts. When he questioned this unusual directive, he was told that the objects were part of a classified military exercise that required no further documentation. Thompson's training and instincts told him something was wrong with that explanation. Military exercises, especially those involving unknown aircraft in restricted airspace, always generated extensive paperwork and coordination between multiple command levels. The complete absence of any official acknowledgement suggested something far more sensitive than routine testing. Over the following weeks, Thompson began noticing patterns in the radar returns that indicated regular visitation by the same objects. They appeared to operate on a schedule, arriving at predictable times and following flight paths that suggested familiarity with the terrain and military installations in the area. More troubling still, Thompson realized that other radar operators were seeing the same objects, but had been instructed to ignore them. The base was tracking regular incursions by unknown craft, but these encounters were being systematically excluded from all official records and reports. Thompson's growing unease about the situation led him to begin keeping unofficial logs of the encounters, documenting the object's flight characteristics, timing, and behavior patterns. What he discovered was evidence of an ongoing program of aerial surveillance that appeared to be monitoring military installations with complete impunity. The objects weren't just visiting randomly. They were conducting systematic reconnaissance of sensitive military facilities, mapping defensive capabilities, and observing operational patterns with the thoroughness of a professional intelligence operation. When Thompson finally decided to report his concerns through official channels, the response was swift and decisive. Within 48 hours, he was transferred to an administrative position at a base in another state. His security clearance was revoked, and his access to classified radar systems was permanently terminated. The official reason for his transfer was cited as routine personnel rotation, but Thompson knew better. He had seen too much and asked too many questions about activities that powerful people wanted to keep hidden from public view. Thompson's case reveals something crucial about how these aerial encounters are managed within military command structures. The objects he tracked weren't being ignored or dismissed as atmospheric anomalies. They were being actively monitored and accommodated by personnel who clearly understood their nature and purpose. This suggests a level of coordination between human military authorities and non-human intelligence that extends far beyond simple witness management or cover-up operations. The objects Thompson observed were operating with the apparent cooperation of the very military systems that should have been defending against unauthorized incursions. The implications are staggering. If military radar operators are being instructed to ignore regular visitations by unknown craft, it means that our airspace is not under human control. It means that some form of ongoing agreement or accommodation exists between human authorities and the intelligence behind these objects. Thompson's story also reveals the personal costs faced by military personnel who attempt to fulfill their sworn duties to protect national security. Rather than being rewarded for vigilance and attention to detail, he was punished for observing and reporting activities that his superiors clearly preferred to keep hidden. The fifth case brings us to a small coastal town where a fishing community's traditional way of life was disrupted by phenomena emerging from the depths of the ocean itself. Captain James Kowalski had been fishing the waters off the Maine coast for over 30 years. He knew every current, every seasonal pattern, and every species that called those waters home. What he encountered during a routine lobster run in September 2019 challenged everything he thought he knew about what lies beneath the surface of our oceans. It was just before dawn when Kowalski first noticed the lights moving beneath his boat. They weren't the random bioluminescence he'd seen countless times before. These lights moved with purpose, traveling in formation and pulsing with a rhythm that seemed almost like communication. As the sun began to rise, Kowalski could see that the lights were attached to objects moving just below the surface. They were large, easily the size of school buses, and they moved through the water with a grace that defied their apparent mass. Most disturbing of all, they seemed to be following his boat, maintaining a constant distance as he moved through his usual fishing grounds. Kowalski tried to radio other fishing vessels in the area, but his communications equipment was experiencing interference that rendered it useless. The compass spun wildly, and his GPS system couldn't maintain a satellite lock. He was effectively isolated in familiar waters that suddenly felt alien and threatening. That's when the objects began to surface. The first one emerged about 200 yards off his starboard bow, water cascading from its smooth metallic surface as it rose from the depths. It had no visible propulsion system, no exhaust, no sound except for the gentle displacement of water as it achieved neutral buoyancy just beneath the surface. Within minutes, 3 more objects had surfaced around his boat, forming a loose circle that trapped Kowalski in the center. He could see other fishing boats in the distance, but they showed no awareness of the extraordinary scene unfolding around him. It was as if the objects were somehow invisible to everyone except him. The largest object began to emit a low-frequency hum that Kowalski felt more than heard. The vibration passed through the hull of his boat and into his body, creating a sensation he later described as being tuned like a radio receiver. Suddenly, he was receiving information directly into his consciousness without any apparent source. The beings operating these craft weren't trying to harm him or interfere with his livelihood. They were conducting research, studying the ocean's ecosystem, and monitoring changes that human activity was causing to marine environments. Kowalski understood, without knowing how he understood, that this monitoring had been ongoing for decades. More disturbing still, he realized that the beings weren't entirely alien to Earth's oceans. They had been here for a very long time, possibly longer than human civilization, operating from underwater installations that remained hidden from surface observation. The encounter lasted approximately 20 minutes before the objects began to submerge. As they descended, Kowalski's equipment returned to normal function, and he was able to establish radio contact with other vessels in the area. None of them reported seeing anything unusual, despite being close enough to have observed the surfaced objects. Kowalski returned to port with a story that he knew no one would believe. However, when he examined his lobster traps later that day, he found evidence that his encounter had been more than just a hallucination or misperception. Several traps had been moved to different locations, arranged in patterns that seemed to indicate systematic examination by something with sophisticated understanding of marine biology. More troubling still, the lobsters in those relocated traps showed signs of having been tagged with tiny metallic devices, unlike anything used by marine biologists. The devices were so small they were barely visible, but they pulsed with the same soft luminescence Kowalski had observed from the underwater objects. When Kowalski reported his findings to marine biology authorities, the response was immediate and overwhelming. Federal agents arrived within hours to confiscate the tagged lobsters and examine his boat for any evidence of the encounter. His fishing license was temporarily suspended, pending an investigation into his reports of unusual marine activity. The investigation concluded that Kowalski had experienced a form of delusional episode brought on by exhaustion and isolation. The metallic tags found on the lobsters were dismissed as debris from offshore industrial activity, despite their sophisticated construction and apparent electronic functionality. Kowalski's case reveals something crucial about the scope of non-human presence on Earth. These encounters aren't limited to aerial phenomena or surface activities. There appears to be an extensive underwater component to this intelligence that has been operating in our oceans for generations without detection or acknowledgement by surface authorities. The systematic nature of the tagging operation suggests long-term monitoring of marine ecosystems that parallels similar activities on land and in the air. Whatever intelligence is behind these operations appears to be conducting comprehensive surveillance of Earth's biosphere, gathering data on environmental changes and species adaptation with the thoroughness of a scientific research program. The sixth encounter takes us deep into the Canadian wilderness, where a geological research team discovered that some of Earth's most remote locations aren't as isolated as we believed. Dr. Michael Chen was leading a mineral survey expedition in the remote regions of northern British Columbia, when his team stumbled upon evidence of activity that shouldn't exist in an area hundreds of miles from the nearest human settlement. They were using ground-penetrating radar to map underground mineral deposits when their equipment began detecting structures that defied geological explanation. The readings showed perfectly geometric chambers carved deep into solid rock, connected by tunnels that extended for miles beneath the forest floor. What made these discoveries particularly unsettling was their apparent age. Carbon dating of organic material found near the entrances suggested these structures had been created thousands of years before any known human civilization had developed the technology for such extensive underground construction. Dr. Chen's team spent days mapping the underground network, discovering that it connected multiple surface locations across hundreds of square miles. The precision of the construction was remarkable, with tunnels maintaining exact gradients and chambers positioned at mathematically perfect intervals. But mapping these structures was only the beginning of their ordeal. On their fourth day at the site, the team began experiencing equipment malfunctions that seemed to follow patterns rather than random failures. Their communications equipment would function normally during daylight hours, but fail completely after sunset. GPS devices provided accurate readings during the morning, but showed impossible locations in the afternoon. Most disturbing of all, team members began reporting missing time. Dr. Chen would find himself standing at the entrance to one of the underground chambers with no memory of how he had gotten there. Other team members described similar experiences, waking up in their tents with muddy boots and clothes damp with moisture that couldn't be explained by the dry climate. The breakthrough came when Dr. Chen decided to install motion-activated cameras at several tunnel entrances. The footage they captured revealed activity that challenged every assumption they had made about the site's ancient origins. The cameras recorded figures moving through the tunnels during the early morning hours. But these weren't archaeological remnants or ancient artifacts. They were clearly alive, moving with purpose and demonstrating technology that seemed far advanced beyond anything in the current scientific inventory. The beings appeared to be conducting maintenance operations on the underground network, making adjustments to structures that had supposedly been abandoned for millennia. They worked with tools that emitted soft light and seemed to manipulate solid rock as if it were malleable clay. When Dr. Chen reviewed this footage with his team, they realized they weren't looking at an archaeological discovery. They had stumbled upon an active installation operated by intelligence that had been using these underground facilities for purposes they couldn't begin to understand. The team's attempts to document their findings were met with immediate interference. Their satellite communication equipment was jammed preventing them from transmitting data to their research institution. Vehicle engines failed when they attempted to leave the site, stranding them in the wilderness with no means of calling for help. It was during this forced isolation that the team experienced direct contact with the beings they had been observing. Dr. Chen described waking up in one of the underground chambers, surrounded by figures who communicated through direct mental transmission rather than spoken language. The beings weren't hostile, but they made it clear that the team's presence was disrupting operations that were crucial to maintaining ecological balance in the region. Dr. Chen understood, through this telepathic communication, that the underground network served as a monitoring and management system for environmental conditions across vast areas of wilderness. The beings had been operating these facilities for thousands of years, making subtle adjustments to groundwater flow, mineral distribution, and soil composition to maintain optimal conditions for plant and animal life. Human industrial activity was creating disruptions that required increasingly complex interventions to prevent ecological collapse. Dr. Chen's team was released after what felt like hours, but may have been days. Their perception of time had been altered during the encounter, making it impossible to determine how long they had been underground. When they emerged, they found their vehicles operational and their communication equipment restored to normal function. However, their research data had been selectively altered. All evidence of the underground structures had been removed from their files, while their mineral survey data remained intact. Their cameras contained no footage of the beings or their activities, though the devices showed signs of having been carefully disassembled and reassembled. The team returned to civilization with a story they knew would be dismissed as hallucination or fraud. Official reports of their expedition mentioned only the mineral survey results, with no reference to the underground discoveries that had dominated their time at the site. Dr. Chen later learned that the area had been quietly designated as protected wilderness, with access restricted through a complex web of environmental regulations that made future research expeditions virtually impossible. The official reasons cited concerns about disturbing sensitive ecosystems, but the speed and thoroughness of the restrictions suggested coordination at levels far above normal environmental protection agencies. The seventh case brings us to the suburbs of Phoenix, where a retired electronics engineer's backyard astronomy hobby revealed that our night skies are far more crowded than most people realize. Robert Martinez had been building and operating amateur radio equipment for over 40 years. His suburban home was equipped with sophisticated antennas and receivers that allowed him to monitor communications across a wide range of frequencies. It was this equipment that first alerted him to transmissions that weren't appearing on any official frequency allocations. The signals were highly organized, operating on frequencies that should have been empty according to Federal Communications Commission records. They used modulation techniques that were more advanced than anything in civilian or military radio systems, carrying data in formats that Martinez's equipment couldn't decode but could clearly detect. Martinez began recording these transmissions and plotting their timing and frequency patterns. What he discovered was evidence of a comprehensive communication network operating parallel to all known human systems. The signals appeared to coordinate activities across multiple geographic locations, with transmission patterns that suggested real-time management of complex operations. The breakthrough came when Martinez correlated the radio transmissions with visual observations from his backyard telescope. Objects that appeared as faint lights moving across the night sky corresponded exactly with peaks in radio traffic, suggesting that the communications were coordinating the movements of aerial craft. These weren't random UFO sightings or distant satellites. Martinez was observing a systematic air traffic control system, managing the movement of multiple objects through controlled airspace on a nightly basis. The precision and organization of these operations rivaled anything operated by human aviation authorities. Martinez spent months documenting this parallel transportation system, creating detailed logs of transmission times, frequencies, and corresponding visual observations. His data revealed patterns that suggested regular schedules and predetermined flight paths, as if the objects were following established routes between specific destinations. The most disturbing aspect of Martinez's discoveries was the geographic scope of the operations. His equipment was detecting coordination signals from locations across the entire southwestern United States, indicating a network of facilities or installations operating in complete secrecy from human authorities. When Martinez attempted to share his findings with amateur radio organizations and UFO research groups, he encountered responses that suggested his discoveries weren't as unknown as he had assumed. Several contacts advised him to discontinue his monitoring activities for his own safety, implying knowledge of consequences faced by others who had made similar discoveries. Martinez's equipment began experiencing targeted interference that seemed designed to disrupt his specific monitoring frequencies. The interference wasn't random electromagnetic noise, but carefully crafted signals that jammed his receivers while leaving nearby amateur radio operators unaffected. His home was visited by individuals claiming to represent the Federal Communications Commission, who conducted an inspection of his equipment and informed him that some of his activities might be violating federal regulations regarding unauthorized monitoring of classified communications. The visitors were polite, but firm in their recommendation that Martinez limit his radio activities to frequencies designated for amateur use. They implied that continued monitoring of unauthorized transmissions could result in criminal charges and confiscation of his equipment. Martinez complied with these recommendations, but not before making copies of his most significant recordings and hiding them in locations known only to him. He had documented evidence of a communication network that operated with impunity in frequencies that were supposedly regulated by federal authorities. The eighth story takes us to the depths of rural Montana, where a ranching family discovered that some property boundaries extend far beyond legal survey markers. The Patterson family had been raising cattle on their remote ranch for 3 generations. Their land stretched across thousands of acres of grassland and rolling hills, far from any major roads or urban development. It was this isolation that made their experiences particularly significant, as there were no conventional explanations for the phenomena they encountered. It began with the cattle. Animals that had grazed peacefully on the same pastures for years suddenly began avoiding specific areas of the ranch. Entire herds would refuse to enter certain valleys, gathering at fence lines and showing signs of extreme agitation when encouraged to move forward. Tom Patterson initially attributed this behavior to predator activity or changes in groundwater that might have affected the taste of grass in those areas. However, investigation revealed no evidence of predators, and water samples showed no chemical anomalies that would explain the animals' reluctance. The pattern became more pronounced over several months, with the cattle consistently avoiding the same geographic areas. These locations formed a rough circle encompassing approximately 50 acres of prime grazing land that the animals now treated as completely off-limits. It was Tom's teenage son, Jake, who first observed the lights that appeared over these restricted areas during the early morning hours. They weren't like anything he had seen before, hovering motionless above the ground and pulsing with a soft radiance that seemed to extend downward into the earth itself. The lights appeared regularly, usually between 3 and 5 in the morning, and always over the same locations that the cattle refused to enter. Jake began documenting these appearances with a digital camera, capturing images that showed structured objects rather than random atmospheric phenomena. When the Patterson family examined these photographs, they realized they were looking at evidence of regular visitation by craft that demonstrated technology far beyond current human capabilities. The objects appeared to be conducting some form of ground-based operations, projecting energy beams downward and remaining stationary for hours at a time. Tom decided to investigate these activities more directly, setting up observation posts at the edges of the restricted areas and monitoring the sites during the hours when the lights typically appeared. What he discovered was evidence of systematic modification of the landscape that was invisible during daylight hours, but clearly apparent under the illumination provided by the craft. The beings operating these craft were conducting what appeared to be environmental management operations, making subtle adjustments to soil composition and plant growth patterns. Areas that had been barren or struggling to support vegetation were gradually transformed into thriving ecosystems that supported wildlife populations far beyond what the natural environment could sustain. But this environmental enhancement came with a price. The Patterson family began experiencing health effects that seemed related to their proximity to the modified areas. They suffered from fatigue, disorientation, and memory problems that intensified whenever they spent extended time near the restricted zones. Medical examinations revealed no conventional explanations for these symptoms, but blood tests showed unusual mineral concentrations that didn't match any known dietary or environmental sources. The family was apparently being affected by whatever processes the craft were using to modify their land. The situation escalated when government representatives arrived at the ranch, claiming to investigate reports of unusual environmental conditions in the area. They conducted extensive soil and water tests, interviewed family members about their health symptoms, and established monitoring equipment at various locations across the property. These officials were clearly familiar with the phenomena the Patterson family had been experiencing. They asked specific questions about the timing and locations of the light appearances, the behavior of livestock, and the family's health symptoms. Their knowledge was far too detailed to represent a preliminary investigation. Within weeks of this official visit, the Patterson family received an offer to sell their ranch to a shell corporation with connections to federal land management agencies. The price offered was substantially above market value, and the buyers were willing to accommodate any timeline the family preferred for relocation. Tom Patterson initially resisted this offer, citing the generations of family history connected to the land. However, the health symptoms experienced by his family continued to worsen, and medical specialists were unable to provide effective treatment or even accurate diagnosis of their conditions. The final factor in their decision came when Jake, who had been documenting the light phenomena, began experiencing episodes of missing time similar to those reported by other witnesses in previous cases. He would find himself standing in the middle of the restricted areas with no memory of how he had gotten there, often during the hours when the craft were known to be active. The Patterson family ultimately accepted the buyout offer and relocated to a smaller property in another state. Their health symptoms gradually improved after leaving the ranch, and Jake's episodes of missing time ceased entirely. Their former property was incorporated into a larger tract of federal land designated for environmental research. Access was restricted, and the area was placed under permanent monitoring by agencies that provided no public information about their activities or findings. The Patterson family's experience reveals something crucial about the scope of these operations. The beings behind these encounters aren't simply visiting Earth for temporary observation or research. They appear to be conducting long-term environmental modification projects that transform entire ecosystems according to plans that extend far beyond human understanding or timeline. These aren't random alien visits or curious exploration missions. They represent systematic terraforming operations that may be preparing Earth's environment for purposes that we can only begin to imagine. The ninth case brings us to the world of commercial aviation, where a flight attendant's routine transcontinental flight became a window into the systematic monitoring of civilian air traffic by intelligence that operates outside all official channels. Maria Santos had been working as a flight attendant for Delta Airlines for 12 years when she encountered something that made her question everything she thought she knew about aviation safety and airspace security. She was working the red-eye flight from Los Angeles to Atlanta, a route she had flown hundreds of times without incident. It was approximately 2 hours into the flight when passengers began pointing toward the windows, excited by lights they were seeing outside the aircraft. Maria initially assumed they were observing city lights, or perhaps another aircraft, but when she looked for herself, she saw something that made her blood run cold. 3 objects were pacing the commercial airliner, maintaining perfect formation, despite the aircraft's speed of over 500 miles per hour. They weren't showing navigation lights, weren't responding to radio communications, and according to air traffic control, didn't exist on radar screens. The objects were clearly artificial, with smooth metallic surfaces that reflected the airliner's navigation lights. They demonstrated precise control, adjusting their positions to maintain constant distance from the aircraft, despite minor course corrections made by the pilots. Captain Rodriguez, who had been flying commercial aircraft for over 20 years, had never encountered anything like these objects. He followed proper protocol by reporting the visual contact to air traffic control, but the response he received was unlike anything in his experience. Rather than expressing concern about unidentified aircraft in controlled airspace, air traffic control seemed already aware of the objects and advised the flight crew to continue normal operations. They were told that the objects were part of a classified military exercise and that no further reporting was necessary. This explanation might have been acceptable except for one crucial detail. The objects weren't behaving like military aircraft conducting exercises. They were clearly studying the commercial airliner, moving closer to examine different sections of the aircraft and maintaining observation positions that suggested systematic data collection. Maria watched through the cabin windows as the objects conducted what appeared to be detailed scans of the aircraft's structure and passenger compartments. Beams of soft light swept across the airliner's fuselage, and she could see passengers throughout the cabin pointing and taking photographs of the extraordinary scene outside their windows. The encounter continued for over an hour, with the objects maintaining their escort formation across 3 states. They demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in the known military inventory, accelerating instantly to match speed changes and making precise adjustments that kept them perfectly aligned with the airliner, despite crosswinds and turbulence. When the objects finally departed, they didn't gradually fall behind or change course like conventional aircraft. They simply accelerated straight upward, disappearing from view in seconds despite their previous leisurely pace. The aftermath of this encounter revealed the systematic nature of how such incidents are managed within the aviation industry. Upon landing in Atlanta, the flight crew was met by federal aviation officials who conducted immediate interviews with all crew members and confiscated any photographic evidence taken by passengers. Passengers were informed that they had witnessed a classified military training exercise and were advised not to discuss the incident publicly. Their phones and cameras were examined, and any images or videos of the objects were deleted under the authority of national security provisions. Maria and her fellow crew members were required to sign non-disclosure agreements that carried severe criminal penalties for violation. They were told that discussing the incident could compromise ongoing national security operations and result in federal prosecution. The official flight records made no mention of the encounter, despite the fact that it had been observed by over 100 passengers and lasted for more than an hour. The incident was classified and buried in files that would remain sealed for decades. But Maria's case reveals something more disturbing than simple witness management. Over the following months, she noticed that similar encounters were occurring with increasing frequency on flights across her route network. Other crew members, bound by the same non-disclosure agreements, would make subtle references to unusual activity that suggested systematic monitoring of civilian aviation by unknown intelligence. The pattern indicated that commercial aircraft were being regularly intercepted and examined by craft, demonstrating technology far beyond current human capabilities. These weren't random encounters or isolated incidents. They represented ongoing surveillance of civilian transportation systems by intelligence that operated with the apparent cooperation of aviation authorities. Maria's experience also revealed the personal costs faced by aviation professionals who encounter these phenomena. Despite her excellent service record, she found herself transferred to less desirable routes and ultimately pressured into early retirement through a series of performance evaluations that seemed designed to force her departure from the airline. The systematic nature of these encounters, combined with the coordinated response from aviation authorities, suggests that commercial aviation operates under agreements or protocols that extend far beyond public knowledge or civilian oversight. The 10th story transports us to the remote wilderness of Alaska, where a bush pilot's routine supply run became an encounter with phenomena that challenge our understanding of what inhabits Earth's most isolated regions. Captain Sarah Mackenzie had been flying supplies to remote settlements and research stations across Alaska for over 15 years. She knew the territory better than most, navigating by landmarks and weather patterns through some of the most challenging flying conditions on Earth. It was during a routine cargo flight to a geological research station that Mackenzie encountered something that would forever change her perception of Alaska's vast wilderness. She was flying through a mountain pass that she had navigated dozens of times before when her aircraft's instruments began malfunctioning in ways that defied technical explanation. Her compass spun wildly, unable to lock onto magnetic north. The GPS system showed her location as coordinates that placed her aircraft in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. Most disturbing of all, her radio communications were filled with voices speaking in languages that didn't sound human, transmitting on frequencies that should have been reserved for emergency communications. Mackenzie was a skilled pilot with extensive experience in emergency situations, but nothing in her training had prepared her for what happened next. Her aircraft began experiencing control problems that seemed to originate from external forces rather than mechanical failure. The plane was being guided by something outside her control, following a flight path that led deeper into the mountain wilderness than she had ever traveled. Her attempts to regain manual control were met with gentle but firm resistance, as if something was overriding her inputs to the flight controls. Despite the frightening nature of the situation, Mackenzie realized that whatever was controlling her aircraft was doing so with extraordinary skill. The flight path avoided dangerous terrain and weather conditions that could have proven fatal to an aircraft operating in those mountains. After approximately 40 minutes of guided flight, Mackenzie's aircraft was directed to a landing strip that shouldn't have existed in that remote location. The runway was clearly artificial, constructed with precision that rivaled major airports, but it appeared on no aviation charts or government surveys of the region. As her aircraft touched down, Mackenzie could see that the landing strip was part of a much larger installation hidden within the mountain valley. Buildings and structures extended into the mountainsides, camouflaged so effectively that they would be invisible to aerial observation from any significant altitude. The facility was clearly operational, with vehicles and equipment moving between buildings and what appeared to be aircraft hangars built into the rock faces. Most disturbing of all, some of the aircraft she observed bore no resemblance to any technology in the current aerospace inventory. Mackenzie was met by individuals who appeared human, but possessed an unusual quality that she found difficult to define. They moved with a fluid grace that seemed unnatural, and their eyes held an intelligence that felt ancient and knowing. Communication with these beings was conducted telepathically rather than through spoken language. Mackenzie received information directly into her consciousness, learning that the facility served as a monitoring and coordination center for activities across the entire Northern Hemisphere. The beings explained that they had been operating from hidden installations throughout Alaska's wilderness for decades, monitoring environmental changes and managing ecological systems that were being disrupted by human industrial activity. Mackenzie understood that her cargo flights had been under observation for years and that her selection for this encounter was based on her demonstrated skill as a pilot and her psychological profile, which indicated an ability to process extraordinary experiences without becoming destabilized. She was shown areas of the facility where advanced technology was being used to monitor and influence weather patterns across vast geographic regions. The beings possessed capabilities that allowed them to moderate the effects of climate change, preventing catastrophic environmental collapse through interventions that remained invisible to human observation. After several hours at the facility, Mackenzie was returned to her aircraft and guided back to her original flight path. Her instruments returned to normal function, and radio communications resumed with air traffic control, who showed no awareness that her flight had deviated from its planned route. Upon landing at her destination, Mackenzie discovered that her cargo had been supplemented with supplies that weren't listed on her manifest. The additional materials appeared to be sophisticated scientific equipment, suggesting that her flight had been used to transport technology to the remote research station without the knowledge of the personnel who had requisitioned her services. The research station staff were clearly expecting these additional supplies, indicating coordination between the beings Mackenzie had encountered and human scientists working on projects that required technology beyond current human capabilities. Mackenzie's case reveals the extent to which these operations have integrated with human activities in remote regions. The beings she encountered weren't operating in isolation from human civilization. They were actively coordinating with human personnel on projects that required their advanced technological capabilities. This level of integration suggests that contact between human and non-human intelligence has progressed far beyond simple observation or occasional interaction. There appears to be ongoing collaboration on projects that address environmental challenges facing the entire planet. The 11th case brings us to the underwater realm, where a deep-sea research team discovered that Earth's oceans hide installations and activities that challenge every assumption about what lies beneath the surface of our planet. Dr. Jennifer Walsh was leading a deep-sea exploration mission in the Mariana Trench when her team encountered structures that defied geological explanation. They were using advanced submersible technology to study volcanic activity at depths exceeding 30,000 feet, when their sonar detected artificial constructions that shouldn't exist at such extreme depths. The structures were massive, clearly engineered, and demonstrated construction techniques that exceeded current human underwater capabilities. They appeared to be part of an extensive complex that extended for miles along the ocean floor, connected by tunnels and passages that suggested systematic design and ongoing maintenance. Dr. Walsh's team spent days mapping these underwater installations, discovering that they weren't ancient ruins or abandoned constructions. The facilities were clearly active, with energy signatures that indicated sophisticated power systems and environmental controls that allowed them to operate at crushing depths where no known human technology could survive. The breakthrough came when the team's submersible was approached by craft that emerged from the underwater installations. These vehicles demonstrated capabilities that made conventional submarines look primitive by comparison, moving through the water with speed and agility that defied every principle of underwater navigation. The beings operating these craft communicated with Dr. Walsh's team through direct mental transmission, conveying information about the purpose and scope of their underwater operations. The installations served as research and monitoring centers for oceanic systems that were being disrupted by human activity on the surface. The beings had been operating these underwater facilities for thousands of years, maintaining ecological balance in the oceans through interventions that remained invisible to surface observation. They possessed technology that allowed them to influence ocean currents, temperature distribution, and marine ecosystem development on a global scale. Dr. Walsh learned that the deep-sea installations were connected to similar facilities in oceans around the world, forming a network of environmental management systems that operated independently of any human oversight or awareness. The beings expressed concern about accelerating environmental damage caused by human industrial activity, particularly the effects of ocean acidification and plastic pollution on marine ecosystems that they had been carefully maintaining for millennia. They revealed that their underwater operations were being expanded to address these growing environmental challenges, requiring increasingly complex interventions to prevent oceanic system collapse that would affect the entire planet. Dr. Walsh's team was allowed to document these underwater installations, but upon returning to the surface, they discovered that their research data had been classified by agencies that claimed authority over deep-sea exploration activities. The official explanation for their discoveries cited the need to protect sensitive environmental research from interference by commercial interests, But the classification extended to all aspects of their findings, including the existence of the installations themselves. Team members were required to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements that prevented them from discussing their discoveries with academic colleagues or publishing their findings in scientific journals. The underwater installations were designated as restricted military research areas, despite their location in international waters and their obvious non-human origins. Dr. Walsh's case reveals that these operations extend into every environment on Earth, from the deepest ocean trenches to the highest mountain peaks. The intelligence behind these activities possesses capabilities that allow them to operate in conditions that would be fatal to human life, conducting research and environmental management on a scale that encompasses the entire planet. The systematic nature of these underwater operations, combined with similar activities on land and in the air, suggests that Earth is under comprehensive management by intelligence that views the planet as a single integrated system requiring constant monitoring and intervention to maintain stability. The 12th encounter takes us to the remote highlands of Scotland, where a telecommunications engineer's routine tower maintenance became a discovery that revealed the true extent of monitoring systems operating beyond human oversight. David MacLeod had been servicing cellular and radio towers across the Scottish Highlands for nearly 2 decades. His work required him to travel to some of the most isolated locations in the region, maintaining equipment that provided communication services to scattered rural communities. It was during one of these routine service calls that MacLeod discovered technology that shouldn't exist in any earthly communication network. He was performing scheduled maintenance on a cellular tower positioned on a remote hilltop when his spectrum analyzer began detecting signals that weren't appearing in any official frequency databases. The transmissions operated on bandwidths that were supposedly empty according to telecommunications authority records, yet they carried data streams that exceeded the capacity of any known communication protocol. MacLeod's extensive experience with radio frequencies made him immediately suspicious of these anomalous signals. They demonstrated modulation techniques that were more sophisticated than military or intelligence communications, transmitting enormous amounts of data with error correction capabilities that surpassed anything in current technological inventories. What made these discoveries particularly unsettling was their apparent coordination with cellular tower operations. The unknown signals seemed to piggyback on legitimate telecommunications traffic, using existing infrastructure to relay information between locations that MacLeod couldn't identify from his equipment readings. Over several weeks of investigation at different tower sites across the Highlands, MacLeod realized he was documenting evidence of a comprehensive surveillance network that operated parallel to all official communication systems. The unknown signals were intercepting and analyzing every phone call, text message, and data transmission passing through the cellular network. But this wasn't conventional electronic surveillance conducted by government intelligence agencies. The signal processing capabilities exceeded anything in known human technology, analyzing communication patterns and extracting information at speeds that would require quantum computing systems that didn't officially exist. MacLeod began correlating the signal activity with visual observations from his elevated tower locations. During periods of peak transmission activity, he could observe lights moving across the highland landscape, following patterns that corresponded exactly with the data flows he was detecting on his instruments. These lights weren't aircraft or ground vehicles. They moved with the fluid precision that MacLeod had learned to associate with technology that operated outside normal physical constraints. They appeared to be collecting and relaying information from sources distributed across hundreds of square miles of rural territory. The most disturbing aspect of MacLeod's discoveries was the geographic scope of the surveillance network. His equipment was detecting coordination signals from locations throughout Scotland, Northern England, and Wales, indicating a monitoring system that encompassed the entire British Isles. When MacLeod attempted to report his findings to telecommunications regulatory authorities, he encountered responses that suggested his discoveries weren't as unknown as he had assumed. Officials seemed familiar with the phenomena he described, but advised him that investigating unauthorized transmissions fell outside his professional responsibilities. McLeod's security clearance for accessing sensitive telecommunications equipment was quietly revoked, and his employment was terminated through a series of performance evaluations that seemed designed to justify his dismissal from the company. His personal communication devices began experiencing targeted interference that prevented him from sharing his findings with amateur radio organizations or UFO research groups. Phone calls would be disconnected at crucial moments, and electronic files containing his documentation would become corrupted or disappear entirely. The pattern of response to McLeod's discoveries revealed something crucial about the integration of these monitoring systems with human telecommunications infrastructure. The surveillance network he had detected wasn't operating in isolation from human technology. It was using existing cellular towers and communication networks as platforms for intelligence gathering on a scale that encompassed entire populations. This level of integration suggested that human telecommunications authorities were either unaware of how their infrastructure was being utilized, or were actively cooperating with intelligence operations that extended far beyond conventional government surveillance programs. McLeod's case demonstrates that these monitoring activities aren't limited to remote wilderness areas or isolated communities. They extend into the communication systems that connect modern civilization, gathering information about human activities with thoroughness that exceeds the capabilities of any known intelligence organization. The 13th story brings us to a suburban neighborhood where a retired physicist's home workshop experiments revealed emissions and energy signatures that originated from sources operating beyond the visible spectrum of human perception. Professor Emeritus Richard Chen had spent 40 years teaching quantum physics at major universities before retiring to pursue independent research in his home laboratory. His suburban garage was equipped with sensitive detection equipment that allowed him to study electromagnetic phenomena and particle interactions that were too subtle for observation in standard academic settings. It was during experiments with quantum field fluctuations that Chen first detected energy signatures that didn't correspond to any known physical phenomena. His instruments were registering particle emissions that seemed to originate from locations within his own home, yet showed characteristics that defied every principle of quantum mechanics he had spent his career studying and teaching. The energy signatures appeared at regular intervals, always in the same locations within his house, and demonstrated properties that suggested intelligence rather than random quantum events. They responded to changes in his experimental setup, adapting their characteristics in ways that indicated awareness of being observed and analyzed. Chen spent months documenting these anomalous readings, discovering that the energy sources were connected to a network of similar emissions throughout his suburban neighborhood. His detection equipment could track these signals between different houses, suggesting that multiple residences were hosting phenomena that their occupants were completely unaware of. The pattern indicated systematic monitoring of human domestic activities by intelligence that operated through dimensions or energy states that remained invisible to normal human perception. The beings conducting this surveillance possessed technology that allowed them to observe and record human behavior without any physical presence that could be detected through conventional means. Chen's breakthrough came when he modified his detection equipment to analyze the information content of these energy emissions. The signals weren't random quantum noise or natural electromagnetic phenomena. They contained structured data that suggested detailed observation and analysis of human activities within the monitored residences. The beings were conducting comprehensive studies of human domestic behavior, family interactions, and individual psychological patterns. They possessed capabilities that allowed them to monitor thoughts and emotions, in addition to physical activities, gathering data about human consciousness that exceeded the scope of any known research program. Chen realized that his own home had been under observation for years, possibly decades, without his awareness. The beings had been studying his scientific research, monitoring his experiments, and analyzing his thought processes as he developed new theoretical frameworks for understanding quantum phenomena. This revelation led Chen to examine his own scientific work with new perspective. Some of his most significant theoretical breakthroughs had occurred during periods when the energy signatures in his home were particularly active, suggesting that his research had been influenced or guided by the intelligence conducting these observations. The implications were staggering. If human scientific advancement was being monitored and potentially directed by non-human intelligence, it meant that humanity's understanding of physics and quantum mechanics might be developing according to plans that served purposes beyond human knowledge or control. Chen's attempts to publish his findings were met with immediate interference from academic institutions that claimed his research violated ethical standards for human subject observation. His former colleagues advised him that pursuing this line of investigation could damage his professional reputation and result in the loss of his emeritus status. His home was visited by individuals claiming to represent federal research oversight agencies, who conducted inspections of his laboratory equipment and advised him that some of his experiments might be violating regulations regarding unauthorized radiation emissions. The visitors were clearly familiar with Chen's discoveries, asking specific questions about his detection methods and the characteristics of the energy signatures he had been monitoring. Their knowledge was far too detailed to represent a preliminary investigation. Chen's laboratory equipment began experiencing systematic failures that seemed designed to prevent him from continuing his research. Sensitive instruments would malfunction at crucial moments, and replacement components would arrive with specifications that didn't match his original equipment. The pattern of interference suggested that Chen's research was approaching discoveries that powerful interests preferred to keep hidden from public knowledge. His work was revealing the existence of monitoring systems that operated with capabilities far beyond current human technology, observing and analyzing human behavior with thoroughness that extended into the realm of consciousness itself. Chen's case demonstrates that these surveillance activities extend into the most private spaces of human experience. The intelligence conducting these operations possesses technology that makes physical presence unnecessary for comprehensive observation and data collection about human activities, thoughts, and emotional states. The systematic nature of this surveillance, combined with the apparent influence on human scientific development, suggests that humanity's intellectual advancement is being monitored and potentially guided by intelligence that views human civilization as a subject for long-term study and possible intervention. The 14th and final case takes us to the edge of space itself, where an International Space Station crew member's routine orbital duties became an encounter with phenomena that revealed the true nature of what monitors Earth from the vacuum of space. Commander Elena Volkov was conducting a routine spacewalk outside the International Space Station when she observed objects that challenged every assumption about what operates in Earth's orbital environment. She was performing maintenance on the station's solar arrays when her attention was drawn to movement in the star field that didn't correspond to any known satellites or space debris. The objects were clearly artificial, maintaining precise formation as they moved through orbital space with propulsion systems that produced no visible exhaust or energy signatures. They demonstrated capabilities that exceeded anything in the current space technology inventory, making course corrections that would require reaction mass far beyond what their apparent size could contain. Volkov's training as a military pilot and aerospace engineer made her immediately aware that she was observing technology that operated outside the known principles of space navigation. The objects moved with precision that suggested advanced guidance systems, but they showed no communication emissions or radar signatures that would indicate coordination with Earth-based control systems. What made this encounter particularly significant was the systematic nature of the object's activities. They weren't random visitors or debris drifting through orbital space. They were conducting coordinated operations that suggested ongoing surveillance of Earth-based activities from positions that provided comprehensive observation of the planet's surface. The objects maintained surveillance positions that allowed them to monitor specific geographic regions adjusting their orbits to maintain optimal observation angles despite the complex gravitational dynamics that govern orbital mechanics. This level of precision required computational capabilities that exceeded anything in current aerospace technology. Volkov attempted to document the encounter using the station's external cameras, but the imaging systems experienced malfunctions that prevented her from obtaining clear recordings of the objects. The camera failures seemed targeted, affecting only the specific systems that were aimed at the unknown craft, while leaving other station equipment fully operational. Communication with ground control about the encounter was met with responses that suggested mission commanders were already aware of the object's presence. Volkov was advised to continue her scheduled maintenance activities and avoid further observation of the anomalous contacts. This directive contradicted standard protocols for reporting unknown objects in orbital space, which required immediate documentation and analysis to assess potential collision risks to the space station. The casual dismissal of objects operating in controlled orbital space suggested that their presence was expected and accommodated by mission planners. Over the following days, Volkov continued to observe the objects during her routine duties, discovering that they maintained regular schedules and operated according to patterns that indicated long-term missions rather than temporary visits to orbital space. The objects appeared to be conducting comprehensive surveillance of Earth's surface, focusing particular attention on military installations, industrial facilities, and population centers. They possessed observation capabilities that exceeded anything in current reconnaissance satellite technology, gathering intelligence with resolution and coverage that would provide unprecedented detail about human activities. Volkov realized that Earth's orbital environment was under systematic monitoring by intelligence that operated independently of any human space program. The objects she observed were part of a comprehensive surveillance network that provided real-time intelligence about human activities to controllers whose identity and purposes remained completely unknown. The encounter revealed that human space activities were being monitored with the same thoroughness that characterized the surveillance operations documented in terrestrial cases. The intelligence behind these activities possessed capabilities that allowed them to operate throughout Earth's environment, from the deepest ocean trenches to the vacuum of space. Upon returning to Earth, Volkov found that her mission reports had been classified at levels that prevented her from discussing her observations with colleagues or family members. She was required to sign comprehensive non-disclosure agreements that carried severe criminal penalties for violation. Her subsequent assignments were limited to ground-based training duties that prevented her from returning to orbital operations. Despite her exemplary service record and advanced technical qualifications, she was effectively barred from future space missions through a series of medical evaluations that questioned her psychological fitness for space operations. Volkov's case represents the culmination of the pattern revealed throughout these 14 encounters. The intelligence conducting these operations possesses capabilities that allow them to monitor and influence human activities throughout every environment on Earth and in the space surrounding our planet. These aren't random alien visits or curious exploration missions. They represent systematic surveillance and management operations that treat Earth as a single integrated system, requiring constant monitoring and occasional intervention to maintain stability according to plans that extend far beyond human understanding or control. The coordination between terrestrial and orbital surveillance activities suggests that humanity is under comprehensive observation by intelligence that views our civilization as a subject for long-term study and possible guidance. The systematic nature of these operations, combined with the coordinated response from human authorities, indicates that some form of ongoing agreement or accommodation exists between human leadership and the intelligence conducting these activities. The personal costs faced by witnesses across all 14 cases reveal the extent to which powerful human institutions will go to maintain secrecy about these operations. Military personnel face career destruction, scientists lose research funding and academic positions, and ordinary citizens find themselves relocated or subjected to surveillance that extends into every aspect of their private lives. Yet the pattern of encounters continues, suggesting that the intelligence behind these operations either cannot or will not maintain complete secrecy about their activities. Each witness represents a crack in the carefully constructed wall of silence that surrounds humanity's true relationship with non-human intelligence. These 14 cases reveal that we are not alone on Earth, and we never have been. The question that remains is whether humanity will continue to accept the carefully managed version of reality that keeps us ignorant of our true circumstances, or whether enough people will begin to recognize the patterns that reveal our planet's actual status as a monitored and managed world. The choice belongs to each individual who hears these accounts and decides whether to accept the comfortable lies that preserve the illusion of human independence, or to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that our civilization operates under the oversight of intelligence that possesses capabilities far beyond our current understanding. Tonight, as you lie in bed processing these revelations, remember that the phenomena described in these cases are ongoing. The monitoring continues, the encounters persist, and the cover-up operations maintain their vigilance against public awareness of humanity's true relationship with the intelligence that shares our world. The lights you dismiss as aircraft, the sounds you attribute to mundane sources, and the experiences you convince yourself were dreams or hallucinations may represent your own encounters with the same phenomena that transform the lives of the witnesses whose stories you've heard tonight. The question isn't whether these encounters will continue. The question is whether you'll recognize them when they happen to you, and whether you'll have the courage to acknowledge what you've experienced despite the personal costs that such recognition might bring. The evidence presented in these 14 cases forms a pattern that extends far beyond individual encounters or isolated incidents. When viewed collectively, these accounts reveal a systematic program of contact and monitoring that has been operating for decades while remaining hidden from public awareness through carefully coordinated suppression efforts. What makes these particular cases so significant isn't just the extraordinary nature of the encounters themselves, it's the consistent response patterns that follow each incident, demonstrating a level of organizational capability and resource allocation that could only come from the highest levels of government and military command. Consider the speed with which witnesses are contacted after their experiences. In case after case, federal representatives arrive within hours or days of encounters, armed with detailed knowledge that suggests they were already monitoring the situations as they unfolded. This isn't reactive damage control. This is evidence of real-time surveillance systems that track these encounters as they occur and deploy response teams with surgical precision. The relocation programs documented across multiple cases reveal perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire operation. Families aren't simply threatened into silence or discredited through character assassination. They're offered financial incentives that make resistance nearly impossible, then quietly moved to locations where their stories can't contaminate local communities with dangerous questions. This approach demonstrates a sophisticated understanding of human psychology and social dynamics. Rather than creating martyrs through heavy-handed intimidation, the system creates willing participants who benefit from their cooperation in maintaining secrecy. The witnesses become complicit in their own silencing, making exposure of the broader program exponentially more difficult. The geographic distribution of these cases reveals another crucial element of the pattern. These encounters aren't clustered around military installations or government facilities where you might expect classified activities to generate unusual phenomena. They're distributed across rural communities, suburban neighborhoods, and remote wilderness areas that should be completely outside the sphere of sensitive government operations. This distribution suggests that the monitoring activities documented in these cases aren't focused primarily on human military or technological capabilities. They're conducting comprehensive surveillance of human civilian populations, studying our behavior patterns, social structures, and individual psychology with the thoroughness of a scientific research program. The environmental modification activities documented in several cases provide perhaps the most chilling insight into the scope and purpose of these operations. The beings conducting these encounters aren't simply observing human activities. They're actively intervening in ecological systems, making adjustments to environmental conditions that affect entire regions while remaining completely invisible to human environmental monitoring agencies. This level of environmental manipulation requires capabilities that exceed current human technology by orders of magnitude. It also suggests long-term planning and objectives that extend far beyond temporary research visits or curiosity-driven exploration. These operations represent systematic management of Earth's biosphere, according to plans that may span centuries or millennia. The medical evidence documented across multiple cases provides additional confirmation that these encounters involve physical interactions rather than psychological phenomena or mass hallucinations. The implants discovered in several witnesses represent technology that doesn't exist in any known materials science database, constructed from elements that shouldn't be stable under normal physical conditions. The systematic removal of these implants by the same intelligence that originally placed them demonstrates ongoing monitoring and control over witness experiences. The beings conducting these operations maintain the ability to track and influence their human subjects long after the initial encounters, suggesting that contact represents the beginning of lifelong relationships rather than isolated incidents. The communication technologies documented across these cases reveal perhaps the most profound implications for human understanding of consciousness and reality itself. The telepathic communication reported by multiple witnesses isn't simply an advanced form of radio transmission. It represents direct interface with human consciousness that bypasses sensory systems entirely. This capability suggests that the intelligence conducting these operations possesses understanding of consciousness and neural function that exceeds current human neuroscience by centuries. It also raises disturbing questions about the extent to which human thoughts and perceptions might be subject to external influence or manipulation. The coordination between terrestrial and orbital surveillance activities documented in the final case demonstrates that these operations encompass the entire Earth system rather than focusing on specific geographic regions or human activities. Humanity is under comprehensive observation from multiple platforms operating in every environment on the planet and in the space surrounding it. This level of surveillance capability represents a quantum leap beyond anything in current human intelligence gathering technology. It also suggests that the intelligence conducting these operations possesses resources and organizational capabilities that rival or exceed those of major nation-states. The pattern of official response to these encounters reveals something equally disturbing about the human side of this equation. The speed and efficiency with which evidence is confiscated, witnesses are managed, and incidents are classified demonstrates that human authorities aren't simply reacting to unexpected phenomena. They're operating according to established protocols that have been refined through decades of practice. This level of institutional preparedness suggests that contact with non-human intelligence isn't an emerging phenomenon that caught government agencies by surprise. It's an ongoing relationship that has been managed through carefully developed procedures that prioritize secrecy above all other considerations, including public safety and national security. The career consequences faced by military and civilian personnel who attempt to fulfill their professional obligations by reporting these encounters reveal the extent to which this secrecy is maintained through systematic punishment of those who threaten it. Highly trained professionals with exemplary service records face immediate career destruction for observing and documenting phenomena that should be considered matters of urgent national importance. This pattern of retaliation against competent professionals suggests that maintaining secrecy about these operations takes precedence over maintaining the integrity of military and civilian institutions. The system is willing to sacrifice its most capable personnel to preserve the illusion that these encounters aren't occurring. The psychological profiles of witnesses across these 14 cases provide additional evidence that these aren't random individuals prone to fantasy or delusion. The witnesses include military officers, commercial pilots, scientists, and other professionals whose careers depend on accurate observation and reliable judgment. Their credibility makes their accounts particularly dangerous to those who prefer to maintain public ignorance about these phenomena. The systematic targeting of credible witnesses for career destruction and social isolation reveals something crucial about the vulnerabilities of this entire suppression system. The most effective way to discredit extraordinary claims is to destroy the credibility of those making them, transforming respected professionals into unemployed outcasts whose stories can be dismissed as the desperate fantasies of disgruntled individuals. The technological capabilities demonstrated across these cases represent advances that exceed current human science by decades or centuries. The propulsion systems that allow craft to make right-angle turns at high velocity, the materials that remain stable under impossible physical conditions, and the energy sources that power complex operations without detectable emissions all point to understanding of physics that transcends our current theoretical frameworks. This technological disparity raises profound questions about humanity's actual position in the cosmic hierarchy of intelligence. If these capabilities represent standard technology for the intelligence conducting these operations, then human civilization may be far less advanced than we assume, existing at a developmental level that makes us subjects for study rather than peers worthy of open contact. The environmental management activities documented in several cases suggest that Earth's ecological systems aren't developing according to natural processes alone. The systematic modification of soil composition, water distribution, and biological populations indicates that our planet's environment is being actively managed to maintain conditions that serve purposes beyond human understanding or control. This level of environmental intervention suggests that humanity's relationship with Earth itself may be fundamentally different from what we assume. Rather than being the dominant species on a planet that evolved according to natural selection and geological processes, we may be residents of a carefully maintained ecosystem that exists according to plans developed by intelligence that views the entire biosphere as a single managed system. The underground installations documented in multiple cases provide evidence that these operations aren't conducted from distant locations or temporary bases. The intelligence behind these encounters maintains permanent infrastructure on Earth, operating from facilities that have existed for thousands of years while remaining completely hidden from human observation. The existence of these installations raises disturbing questions about humanity's actual knowledge of our own planet. If massive underground complexes can operate for millennia without detection, it suggests that our understanding of Earth's geology and geography may be far more limited than we realize. The communication networks documented across multiple cases reveal that these operations are coordinated through systems that operate parallel to all human telecommunications infrastructure. The intelligence conducting these activities possesses communication capabilities that exceed human technology while remaining invisible to our monitoring systems. This parallel communication network suggests that Earth hosts two separate civilizations operating with completely different technological capabilities and organizational structures. The advanced civilization possesses capabilities that make human technology appear primitive by comparison, while maintaining complete secrecy about their presence and activities. The systematic nature of witness management across all 14 cases reveals that suppression of information about these encounters isn't handled by individual government agencies responding to isolated incidents. It's coordinated through institutional structures that span multiple agencies and extend into civilian organizations with the resources and authority to relocate entire families and destroy professional careers. This level of coordination suggests that management of public awareness about non-human intelligence represents one of the highest priorities of the institutions that govern human civilization. The resources devoted to maintaining secrecy about these operations exceed those allocated to most acknowledged national security programs. The pattern of ongoing contact documented across multiple cases indicates that these encounters aren't random events that might eventually cease as human technology advances. They represent systematic interaction between human and non-human intelligence that appears to be expanding rather than diminishing over time. The escalation of encounter frequency and sophistication suggests that whatever objectives drive these operations are approaching critical phases that require increased interaction with human subjects. The intelligence conducting these activities may be preparing for developments that will fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with both our planet and our place in the cosmic community of intelligent species. The evidence presented in these 14 cases challenges every fundamental assumption about humanity's relationship with Earth, our understanding of consciousness and reality, and our position in the universe itself. These aren't simply stories about unusual experiences or unexplained phenomena. They're documentation of ongoing contact between human civilization and intelligence that possesses capabilities that exceed our current understanding by orders of magnitude. The systematic suppression of this evidence reveals that powerful human institutions have made deliberate decisions to keep the general population ignorant of humanity's true circumstances. This isn't protection of classified military technology or preservation of national security advantages. This is maintenance of a carefully constructed illusion that preserves social stability at the cost of truth about the most important questions facing human civilization. The personal costs documented across all 14 cases demonstrate that this system of secrecy is maintained through systematic punishment of those who threaten it. Witnesses face career destruction, social isolation, and ongoing surveillance that extends into every aspect of their private lives. The message is clear. Cooperation with secrecy is rewarded, while attempts to share truth about these encounters result in consequences that few individuals can withstand. Yet the encounters continue, and witnesses continue to come forward, despite the personal costs they know they will face. This suggests that the intelligence behind these operations either cannot or will not maintain complete secrecy about their activities. Each new witness represents another crack in the wall of silence that surrounds humanity's true relationship with non-human intelligence. The question that emerges from these 14 cases isn't whether contact between human and non-human intelligence is occurring. The evidence for ongoing contact is overwhelming and undeniable. The question is whether humanity will continue to accept the managed version of reality that keeps us ignorant of our true circumstances, or whether enough people will begin to recognize the patterns that reveal our actual status as residents of a monitored and managed world. The choice belongs to each individual who encounters this evidence and decides whether to accept the comfortable lies that preserve the illusion of human independence, or to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that our civilization operates under the oversight of intelligence that possesses capabilities far beyond our current comprehension. These 14 cases represent only a fraction of the encounters that occur regularly around the world. For every witness whose story has been documented, dozens or hundreds more have had similar experiences but lack the courage or resources to come forward. The true scope of these operations extends far beyond what any individual researcher or organization has been able to document. The patterns revealed in these cases will continue to repeat as long as the systematic suppression of evidence maintains public ignorance about humanity's true relationship with non-human intelligence. Each new encounter will be managed through the same protocols that have proven effective for decades, transforming potential revelations into buried secrets that never reach public awareness. But the system isn't perfect, and the witnesses keep coming forward. Each account adds another piece to the puzzle that reveals the true nature of reality on Earth. Eventually, the accumulation of evidence will reach a critical mass that makes continued suppression impossible, forcing acknowledgement of truths that will fundamentally transform human understanding of our place in the universe. Until that moment arrives, the evidence remains hidden in classified files, buried in bureaucratic procedures, and scattered across the testimonies of witnesses who have paid dearly for their willingness to speak truth about experiences that challenge everything we thought we knew about our world. The implications of these 14 cases extend beyond individual encounters or isolated phenomena. They reveal a systematic program of contact and monitoring that has been operating for generations while remaining hidden from public awareness through carefully orchestrated suppression efforts that span multiple institutions and levels of government. What emerges from this pattern isn't a picture of random alien visitation or curious exploration missions. Instead, we see evidence of comprehensive management of human civilization by intelligence that possesses capabilities so advanced they appear almost magical by our current standards of understanding. The environmental modification programs documented across multiple cases suggest that Earth's ecological systems aren't developing according to natural processes alone. The beings conducting these operations appear to be actively managing our planet's biosphere, making adjustments to maintain conditions that serve purposes we can only begin to imagine. The underground installations that have operated for millennia without human detection indicate that we share our planet with intelligence that has been here far longer than human civilization has existed. These aren't visitors from distant stars. They're residents of Earth who have maintained hidden presence while human society developed, according to patterns they may have influenced or directed. The surveillance networks that monitor human activities from the deepest ocean trenches to orbital space demonstrate capabilities that exceed our current technology by orders of magnitude. Every environment on Earth appears to be under systematic observation by intelligence that treats our entire planet as a single integrated system, requiring constant monitoring and occasional intervention. The communication technologies that interface directly with human consciousness suggest that our understanding of mind and reality itself may be fundamentally incomplete. The beings conducting these operations possess knowledge of consciousness that allows them to influence human thoughts and perceptions in ways that bypass our sensory systems entirely. The medical evidence of implants constructed from materials that shouldn't exist, according to our understanding of physics, indicates that these encounters involve physical interactions with technology that operates outside the known laws of science. The systematic removal of these devices demonstrates ongoing control over human subjects that extends far beyond the initial contact experiences. The coordination between human authorities and the intelligence conducting these operations reveals perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this entire phenomenon. The speed and efficiency with which evidence is confiscated and witnesses are managed suggests that contact isn't an emerging phenomenon that caught government agencies by surprise. It's an ongoing relationship that has been carefully managed through established protocols refined over decades of experience. The career consequences faced by military and civilian personnel who attempt to report these encounters demonstrate that maintaining secrecy about these operations takes precedence over institutional integrity and national security. The system is willing to destroy its most capable professionals to preserve the illusion that these phenomena aren't occurring. The relocation programs that quietly move entire families away from encounter sites reveal a sophisticated understanding of social dynamics and information control. Rather than creating martyrs through intimidation, the system creates willing participants who benefit financially from their cooperation in maintaining silence about their experiences. The pattern of ongoing contact documented across all 14 cases indicates that these encounters represent the beginning of lifelong relationships rather than isolated incidents. The intelligence conducting these operations maintains the ability to monitor and influence their human subjects indefinitely, suggesting that contact fundamentally alters the relationship between individuals and the hidden systems that govern our world. The technological disparities documented across these cases raise profound questions about humanity's actual position in the hierarchy of intelligence that operates on Earth. If these capabilities represent standard technology for the beings conducting these operations, then human civilization may exist at a developmental level that makes us subjects for study rather than peers worthy of open contact. The systematic nature of environmental management activities suggests that Earth's ecological systems are being maintained according to long-term plans that may span centuries or millennia. Human industrial activity appears to be creating disruptions that require increasingly complex interventions to prevent environmental collapse that would affect the entire planet. The evidence presented in these 14 cases challenges every fundamental assumption about human independence, planetary ownership, and our understanding of consciousness and reality itself. We aren't looking at random encounters with curious extraterrestrial visitors. We're looking at documentation of comprehensive management of human civilization by intelligence that has been operating on Earth far longer than we have existed as a species. The personal costs documented across all these cases reveal the true price of knowledge about humanity's actual circumstances. Witnesses face career destruction, social isolation, and ongoing surveillance that extends into every aspect of their private lives. The message transmitted through these consequences is unmistakable. Cooperation with secrecy brings rewards, while attempts to share truth about these encounters result in punishment that few individuals can endure. Yet despite these consequences, witnesses continue to come forward, driven by conscience and the recognition that truth about these phenomena represents one of the most important issues facing human civilization. Each account adds another piece to the puzzle that reveals the true nature of our relationship with the intelligence that shares our world. The systematic suppression of this evidence reveals that powerful human institutions have made deliberate decisions to maintain public ignorance about humanity's true circumstances. This isn't protection of legitimate national security interests or preservation of social stability. This is maintenance of a carefully constructed illusion that keeps the general population unaware of the most significant reality affecting human civilization. The coordination required to maintain this level of secrecy across multiple institutions and decades of time indicates that suppression of information about non-human intelligence represents one of the highest priorities of the systems that govern human society. The resources devoted to maintaining ignorance about these operations exceed those allocated to most acknowledged government programs. The pattern of escalating encounter frequency documented across recent cases suggests that whatever objectives drive these operations are approaching phases that require increased interaction with human subjects. The intelligence conducting these activities may be preparing for developments that will fundamentally alter humanity's relationship with both our planet and our position in the cosmic community of intelligent species. The evidence reveals that we live in a world where reality is carefully managed to maintain illusions that serve purposes beyond public understanding or consent. The comfortable assumptions that humanity represents the dominant intelligence on Earth, that our governments operate with full knowledge of activities within their territories, and that our scientific understanding encompasses the true nature of physical reality, are all carefully maintained deceptions. The choice facing each individual who encounters this evidence is whether to accept the managed version of reality that preserves comfortable illusions, or to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that human civilization operates under the oversight and management of intelligence that possesses capabilities far beyond our current comprehension. These 14 cases represent windows into a reality that exists parallel to the world presented through official channels and mainstream media. They reveal ongoing operations that affect every aspect of human experience while remaining hidden from public awareness through systematic suppression efforts that span generations. The witnesses whose stories have been shared tonight paid dearly for their willingness to speak truth about experiences that challenge the fundamental narratives that govern human understanding of our world. Their courage in coming forward, despite the personal costs they knew they would face, represents one of the most important contributions to human knowledge in our time. The patterns revealed through their accounts will continue to repeat, as long as the systematic suppression of evidence maintains public ignorance about humanity's true relationship with the intelligence that manages our world. Each new encounter will be handled through the same protocols that have proven effective for decades, transforming potential revelations into buried secrets that never reach public consciousness. But the evidence continues to accumulate, and the witnesses keep coming forward. Eventually, the weight of testimony and documentation will reach a threshold that makes continued suppression impossible, forcing acknowledgement of truths that will fundamentally transform human understanding of our place in the universe and our relationship with the intelligence that has been guiding our development from the shadows. Until that moment arrives, the truth remains hidden in classified files, suppressed through institutional intimidation, and scattered across the testimonies of individuals who have sacrificed their careers, their relationships, and their peace of mind to preserve evidence of the most important reality facing human civilization. The question isn't whether these encounters will continue. They will persist as long as the intelligence conducting them has purposes that require ongoing interaction with human subjects. The question is whether enough people will recognize the patterns that reveal our true circumstances and demand acknowledgement of realities that have been hidden from public view for far too long. Tonight, as you process these revelations, remember that the phenomena described in these cases are ongoing. The monitoring continues, the encounters persist, and the suppression efforts maintain their vigilance against public awareness of humanity's actual relationship with the intelligence that shares our world. The experiences you dismiss as imagination, the sightings you attribute to conventional explanations, and the dreams that feel too real to be products of sleep, may represent your own encounters with the same phenomena that transformed the lives of the witnesses whose stories you've heard. The evidence is there for those who have the courage to see it. The patterns are clear for those who have the wisdom to recognize them, and the truth awaits those who have the strength to acknowledge it, despite the personal costs that such recognition might bring. The choice is yours. The comfortable lies that preserve illusion, or the uncomfortable truth that reveals reality. The decision you make will determine not only your own understanding of the world you inhabit, but your role in humanity's eventual awakening to the true nature of our circumstances and our relationship with the intelligence that has been shaping our destiny from the beginning. The truth about these 14 encounters extends beyond what any single witness experienced. When we map the locations, timing, and witness profiles across all these cases, a disturbing picture emerges. These weren't random selections. The intelligence behind these operations chose their subjects with the precision of a scientific study, targeting individuals whose psychological profiles, professional backgrounds, and social positions made them ideal candidates for long-term observation and interaction. The Mitchell family's rural isolation, Captain Hayes's aviation expertise, Dr. Rodriguez's geological knowledge, Sergeant Thompson's radar experience. Each witness possessed specific skills or circumstances that made them valuable subjects for different aspects of an ongoing research program. This wasn't coincidental. It was systematic selection based on criteria that served purposes we're only beginning to understand. What makes this pattern even more chilling is the evidence that these selections were made years before the actual encounters occurred. Background investigations, psychological assessments, and behavioral monitoring preceded the contact events by months or sometimes years. The witnesses weren't stumbling into random encounters. They were being groomed for specific roles in a carefully orchestrated program of human study and interaction. The aftermath protocols reveal something equally disturbing about the human side of this equation. The speed and precision with which response teams arrived at encounter sites, the detailed knowledge they possessed about events that had just occurred, and the sophisticated relocation and witness management programs they implemented all point to institutional structures that have been operating in the shadows for decades. These aren't ad hoc responses to unexpected phenomena. They're evidence of carefully developed procedures that have been refined through countless similar operations. The system knows exactly what to do when these encounters occur because they've been managing them for generations. The technology demonstrated across these cases represents capabilities that challenge our fundamental understanding of physics, consciousness, and the nature of reality itself. The craft that make impossible maneuvers, the materials that shouldn't exist according to our periodic table, and the communication systems that interface directly with human consciousness all point to scientific knowledge that exceeds our current understanding by centuries. But perhaps the most disturbing revelation isn't the technological disparity. It's the evidence that human scientific advancement may be developing according to plans that serve purposes beyond our knowledge or control. The correlation between witness encounters and subsequent breakthroughs in their professional fields suggests that contact isn't just about observation, it's about guidance, influence, and possibly direction of human intellectual development. The environmental management activities documented across multiple cases reveal operations that treat Earth's entire biosphere as a single managed system. The beings conducting these interventions possess capabilities that allow them to influence weather patterns, soil composition, and ecological balance on a planetary scale, while remaining completely invisible to human environmental monitoring systems. This level of environmental control raises profound questions about humanity's relationship with our own planet. Are we the dominant species on Earth, or are we residents of a carefully maintained ecosystem that exists according to plans developed by intelligence that views the entire biosphere as their responsibility? The underground installations that have operated for millennia without human detection suggest that we share our world with civilizations that predate our own by thousands of years. These aren't visitors from distant stars conducting temporary research missions. They're permanent residents of Earth who have maintained hidden presence while human society developed according to patterns they may have influenced from the beginning. The communication networks that operate parallel to all human telecommunications infrastructure demonstrate capabilities that make our most advanced technology appear primitive by comparison. The intelligence conducting these operations possesses the ability to monitor and influence human activities through systems that remain completely invisible to our detection methods. The surveillance capabilities documented across these cases encompass every environment on Earth and extend into orbital space. From the deepest ocean trenches to the edge of our atmosphere, humanity is under comprehensive observation by intelligence that treats our entire planet as a single integrated system, requiring constant monitoring and occasional intervention. The medical evidence of implants constructed from materials that violate known physical laws provides undeniable proof that these encounters involve technology that operates outside our current scientific understanding. The systematic placement and removal of these devices demonstrates ongoing control over human subjects that extends far beyond the initial contact experiences. The coordination between human authorities and the intelligence conducting these operations reveals perhaps the most unsettling aspect of this entire phenomenon. The evidence suggests that contact isn't an emerging issue that caught government agencies unprepared. It's an ongoing relationship that has been carefully managed through established protocols developed over decades of cooperation. The personal costs faced by witnesses across all 14 cases demonstrate the true price of knowledge about humanity's actual circumstances. Career destruction, social isolation, and ongoing surveillance represent the systematic punishment of those who threaten the carefully maintained illusions that keep the general population ignorant of our true situation. Yet despite these consequences, the encounters continue and witnesses keep coming forward. This persistence suggests that the intelligence behind these operations either cannot or will not maintain complete secrecy about their activities. Each new witness represents another crack in the wall of silence that surrounds humanity's true relationship with the intelligence that manages our world. The escalating frequency and sophistication of these encounters in recent years suggests that whatever objectives drive these operations are approaching critical phases that require increased interaction with human subjects. The intelligence conducting these activities may be preparing for developments that will fundamentally alter humanity's understanding of our place in the universe and our relationship with the civilizations that share our planet. The evidence presented in these 14 cases challenges every comfortable assumption about human independence, planetary ownership, and our understanding of reality itself. We're not looking at isolated incidents or random encounters. We're examining documentation of comprehensive management of human civilization by intelligence that has been operating on Earth far longer than our species has existed. The systematic suppression of this evidence reveals that powerful institutions have made deliberate decisions to maintain public ignorance about the most important reality affecting human civilization. This isn't protection of legitimate security interests. This is maintenance of carefully constructed illusions that serve purposes beyond public understanding or consent. The choice facing each individual who encounters this evidence is whether to accept the managed version of reality that preserves comfortable deceptions, or to acknowledge the uncomfortable truth that human civilization operates under the oversight of intelligence that possesses capabilities far beyond our current comprehension. These 14 cases represent only the visible portion of a phenomenon that extends far beyond what any individual researcher has been able to document. For every witness whose story has been preserved, countless others have had similar experiences, but lack the resources or courage to come forward against a system designed to silence them. The patterns revealed through these accounts will continue to repeat until the accumulation of evidence reaches a threshold that makes continued suppression impossible. That moment approaches as more witnesses find the courage to speak and more researchers dedicate themselves to preserving the truth about humanity's actual circumstances. Until then, the evidence remains scattered across testimonies of individuals who sacrificed everything to preserve knowledge of the most significant reality facing our species. Their courage in speaking truth, despite the personal costs, represents one of humanity's most important contributions to our understanding of the world we actually inhabit. The question isn't whether these encounters will continue. They will persist as long as the intelligence conducting them has purposes that require ongoing interaction with human subjects. The question is whether enough people will recognize the patterns and demand acknowledgement of realities that have been hidden from public view for far too long. Tonight, as you drift toward sleep, remember that the world described in these 14 cases is the world you inhabit. The monitoring continues, the encounters persist, and somewhere in the darkness, the intelligence that has been shaping human destiny from the shadows continues its ancient work.